many young people participating in this call, and I would gladly urge the young people to participate actively in this session. But also we have amidst us, we are greatly honored to have colleagues from Sudani, Central Darfur IDP camp, courtesy of the United Nations, African Union hybrid operation in Darfur. Ladies and gentlemen, moving forward, let me introduce Ms. Boemo Sekgoma, the Secretary General of the SADC Parliamentary Forum, to open with introductory remarks on behalf of the convening partners. Ms. Boemo Madu Sekgoma holds a Master of Arts in Clinical Mental Health from the Lesley University, Boston. She also has a postgraduate diploma in community counseling from University of Botswana. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Humanities from the University of Botswana again, and she has a certificate in promoting and managing HIV and AIDS prevention programs from the University of Exeter, England. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Ms. Boemo Sekgoma to give us the introductory remarks. Welcome, Ms. Boemo.
Thank you, Millicent. As our Director of Ceremonies today, allow me to recognize the Honorable Deputy Speaker of Botswana, Honorable Mabuse Pule, the Honorable Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly of South Africa, Honorable Lechesa, Honorable Xola Nqola, a Member of Parliament from South Africa. I'd also like to recognize Ms. Millicent Sethaile, who's one of the youth advocates in this panel, Mr. Hussein Melele, who's one of the panelists in this session, and pay tribute to our partners in this forum being UNFPA, UNAIDS, UNESCO, Restless Development, APHRC, AfriYAN, and the SADC Parliamentary Forum Fraternity. I also wish to recognize in absentia His Royal Highness, Prince Seiso, who unfortunately could not be with us due to an unforeseen incident that has just occurred. We wish him well for this day. Your Excellencies, honorable speakers, and distinguished participants, it's with immense pleasure that I address you today to make introductory remarks on behalf of the convening partners. As you are aware, this event forms part of a series of events organized to explore the linkages and entry points for the youth in relation to their engagement with national parliaments. The series of events have been a resounding success, and today it reaches a climax as we celebrate International Youth Day. On behalf of the convening partners, I would like to pay special tribute, I'd like to pay special tribute to the youth of today, who will be responsible for shouldering the coveted people-driven development for Africa and unlock their potential in this regard. The youth of Africa have talent, and this talent will benefit the majority of our countries in the SADC region and in Africa. Their talent will benefit a globalized Africa as a whole. With Africa rapidly pioneering and stepping into nascent industries, the youth of today will have unprecedented opportunities to tap into. That will come hand in hand with investment in education and skills development in appropriate areas. According to the African Economic Outlook of 2020, Africa can be a land for mushrooming opportunities, provided the necessary investments are made in human capital, which includes the youth. Undoubtedly, the youth of today have the ability to set up to the emerging challenges and oil the machinery to promote inclusive growth and keep Africa's Agenda 2063 on the right track. Honorable members, Your Excellencies and colleagues, indeed, if Africa is to rise to the aspirations of being an international business, financial and medical hub powered by technological leadership, it is only the youth of today who can partake in this long-term agenda and make it a sustainable one. You'll agree with me, it is to this promising youth today that I wish to pay tribute on behalf of the SADC Parliamentary Forum and partners. As we rely on the youth to be the catalyst for expanded horizons of economic prosperity to open up for Africa. Honorable members, today, as we forge further with the HIV/AIDS champions, speakers of national parliaments, partners and youth across Africa, I wish to speak to the role of the youth in implementing basic human rights, including the right to health and its component of sexual and reproductive health and rights. As you may be aware, the right to health is often termed as non-justiciable right, in the sense that it is not considered as a constitutional right in most of our nations. Despite the close link of the right to health with the right to life and the right to physical integrity, the right to health, is often left behind and does not constitute a budgeting priority for most of our African countries. The end result of this lack of justiciability of the right to health is that it cannot be legally enforced in courts of law, thus contributing to its lack of prioritization by African governments. Therefore, it is common to find public health infringements through inadequate provisions of sexual reproductive health and HIV/AIDS-related services that remain unattended for years, with citizens having little to say in this matter. The bottom line on this reflection is that there's a significant change of mindset that is required for the right to health to become justiciable. And this change necessarily needs to start from the youth, from the influence that our national parliaments will be able to embrace, and for all other processes that are related to advocacy in this regard. Once this change of mindset blooms from the youth, social movements, which engage with parliaments as an institution, may then contribute to bringing legislative changes that enhance the enforceability of the right to health, both in the courts and outside. The youth can influence incremental change, and the interfacing of the youth with parliaments can bring about spontaneous enhancements towards social transformation in the field of sexual reproductive health and rights. Besides, the relevance of the youth in relation to sexual reproductive health and rights implementation cannot be overemphasized, given that it is the youth who are primarily affected by issues such as lack of contraception, safe abortion, and they must therefore take the theme of sexual reproductive health and rights to heart. Your Excellencies, honorable speakers, and distinguished participants, today we have ingredients for sexual reproductive health and rights implementation from different legal instruments protecting the youth. Article 16 of the African Youth Charter promotes sexual reproductive health and rights and comprehensive sexuality education for the youth. And the need for health rights of children to be respected is provided for in the African Charter on the right and welfare of the child. Africa Agenda 2063, which is an approved regional agenda, also clearly provides for the empowerment of the youth, including through education and the learning of life skills. Although the African Youth Charter is in force since 2009, most African countries, including those in the SADC, have not fully implemented it after more than a decade. Today, stigmas and taboos still exist about the mere knowledge of contraceptives, drugs, and instruments, and sexuality education is still considered as a sensitive, if not prohibited, subject in many regions. In addition, stigma and taboos are exacerbated by traditional practices such as child marriage and betrothals, in complete oblivion of commitments already taken by states at the regional and international level. I would therefore say that the impetus to domesticate legal instruments that advance democracy and human rights resides with the youth, as domestication is a long, progressive process which will take place over years, if not decades. This is therefore a process that will essentially witness us taking the movement to the next level by the youth, and it will happen only with our collaboration and full involvement. Honorable members, Your Excellencies, and distinguished participants, as I mentioned earlier, I'm confident that deliberations on International Youth Day will constitute the climax of this youth engagement as we examine the synergies on sexual reproductive health and rights, HIV, which may be forged with parliaments as an institution. I hope that the exchanges of today will be insightful and will further motivate the youth to act in positions of leadership in view of promoting sexual reproductive health and rights. As I conclude, I wish to seize this opportunity to thank you all, convening partners, who have worked tirelessly to make these series a success. And I believe that this is possible through such collaborations as we witness here today. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Ms. Boemo, for the introductory remarks. And we're really grateful for recognizing the talents that young people have across Africa, and recognizing the fact that young people can contribute greatly to achieving sustainable development goals in Africa, and that we can greatly contribute to interface with the youth parliamentarians so that we accelerate the progress of different interventions that are there in relation to sustainable development goals, which are related to laws. Thank you so much. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I will leave the floor to my colleague, Millicent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Millicent Tshuma. I'm from Zimbabwe, and I'm from the Young People's Network on Sexual Reproductive Health, HIV and AIDS. We are convened by National AIDS Council, and I am the Southern Region. We have Mr. Honorary, he's the Member of Parliament, born and bred in the province of Eastern Cape. He's also the mentor of the member of the African National Congress and the National Assembly, Correctional Services, and also International Relations, and is also part of the cooperation portfolio committee. Mr. Xola will give us an overview of the Tshwane Declaration. Over to you, Honorable.
Thank you very much, Millicent. Am I audible enough?
Indeed.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, Honorable.
All right, thank you. Greetings to all of us who have attended here. Prince Seeiso in absentia, the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly of South Africa, Honorable Tsenoli, the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly of Botswana, the leadership of the SADC Parliamentary Forum. Greetings to all colleagues who are in attendance in this Youth Indaba. We last saw each other before the spread of the pandemic, hoping that all of us are keeping safe. The Youth Indaba took place in Pretoria, South Africa from the 15 to 17 October 2019. It was hosted by the following partners: SADC Parliamentary Forum, UNAIDS, UNFPA, UNESCO, AfriYAN, Restless Development, and APHRC. It was held under the theme, delivering on political commitments on sexual and reproductive health and rights, HIV and gender equality in the SADC region through youth-led accountability. It drew participants from the following groups: young parliamentarians and young activists and professionals engaged in SRHR, HIV, gender equality across the SADC region. It provided a strategic platform for intergenerational dialogue between young and senior parliamentarians and development partners. The rationale of the Youth Indaba held last year took stand from the fact that SADC member states have made strong commitments within global, continental, and regional frameworks to strengthen investments in young people, SRHR, HIV, and promote gender equality. Still, young people remain one of the most vulnerable groups in the attaining SRHR and gender equality, not least in terms of the high rate of new HIV infections, early and unintended pregnancy, and child marriage, just to mention a few. Young people under the age of 35 are rarely found in formal political leadership positions and have limited influence in decision-making processes, which undermine meaningful youth participation in matters that affect young people's lives. The Indaba declared as follows: arising from the extensive deliberations by the stakeholders participating in the Youth Indaba, the SADC Parliamentary Forum Standing Committee on Gender Equality, Women Advancement and Youth Development presented the Tshwane Declaration to the 46th Plenary Assembly session of the SADC Parliamentary Forum in December 2019, where it was unanimously adopted. By adopting the Tshwane Declaration, SADC Parliamentary Forum committed to a number of interventions, including to domesticate global, continental, and regional commitments on SRHR, HIV, and gender equality into harmonized laws, policies, and programs with particular emphasis on issues pertaining to adolescents and young people's development and their access to universal health coverage. To amend and, where necessary, revoke laws and policies that limit the freedom of expression and choices of young people, be as they negatively impact on young people's ability to access integrated SHR, HIV, GBV services, comprehensive sexuality education, social protection, and harm reduction services, including for the most marginalized and key populations. To enhance the knowledge and capacity of young people in order for them to advocate for SRHR, HIV, and gender equality within national development agendas. To promote young people with platforms to effectively influence legislation and policy reforms, and to advocate for adequate and sustainable allocation of domestic resources that are proportionate to the population size and needs of young people, so as to accelerate implementation of national programs at scale. Through accountable parliaments, the socio-economic challenges of the youth be effectively addressed, including by introducing gender-sensitive, inclusive integration of young parliamentarians in existing parliamentary structures. That will be the legitimate voice of youth across the SADC member states. In line with the SADC Parliamentary Forum Youth Development Program 5-year strategic plan, and parliaments using their legislation oversight and representation mandate should ensure that the executive delivers on their commitments to sexual and reproductive health, HIV and gender equality for adolescents and youth as listed above. Taking forward the commitments of the Tshwane Declaration, the adopted commitments invite for enhanced partnership to mobilize all available capacity and resources. The purpose of today's webinar is to identify key interventions to accelerate the implementation of the Tshwane Declaration with national parliaments through political leadership of our honorable speakers and responding to young people's needs and challenges exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. We should take full advantage of this unique platform to robustly engage with decision makers and ensure the enhancement of youth-led accountability. Thank you very much, Millicent. Today is my birthday. You can use the remaining 3 minutes singing for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable. I'm sure we will find time to sing for you and celebrate your birthday. Thank you for the overview of the Tshwane Declaration and that young people were able to make intergenerational dialogue between parliamentarians and young people. Ladies and gentlemen, moving on, I would like to introduce Millicent Sethaile. She is a community developer and youth activist. She also currently works as a youth sexual reproductive health and rights officer at Africa Trust, and also she's an ambassador for her voice, and also she graduated with a degree in finance and accounting. Her passion is to merge the financing and development industries to serve communities by investing in programs that work and positively impact lives of young people. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Millicent Sethaile. Over to you. Millicent?
The system was indicating that her network is quite low.
Okay. Please bear with us as we see if we are able to connect.
Millicent, can you hear us? Millicent Sethaile? I think you're still on mute.
Okay, whilst we're waiting for Millicent to connect with us, our participants, you may also be sharing your questions on what so far have been discussed so that we can go over them in our interactive section. So for our participants, you can also be putting down your questions. If you have any questions on the presentation done by the Honorable and welcome remarks that we had, can we please put it down? And honorable members, please remember to put your mics on mute if you are, yes, thank you.
Okay, can we have the presentation up and then we'll continue with the presentation. Pulling here. I'll stand in for Millicent and then we can quickly go through the presentation. Thank you very much. This presentation is on the harmonization of the legal environment on adolescent sexual and reproductive health in East and Southern Africa. Possibly some colleagues may have seen the presentation, but we feel it's important that as we commemorate International Youth Day today, we continue to highlight some of these critical issues. The ages of consent really to sexual activities, marriage, and access to services will be discussed. We'll give just a snapshot about these issues as we commemorate today. So from a study that was done in the region, some of the key findings highlight that in terms of age of consent, especially looking at sexual activity, as our focus is on mainly sexual and reproductive health and rights, that about half of the East and Southern African countries do not have the age of consent to sexual activities in a way that is clearly provided for both the young people to understand, as well as for service providers and the general population, including parents. So this is critical. The study also highlighted that it's really difficult for young people and the community at large to ascertain what the minimum legal age for sexual activity is. And this is due to the different pieces of legislation that we have and the different systems that we have in the different countries, hence the difficulty. And there are countries where the age of consent is lower for girls and higher for boys. And we do understand some of the influences that have led to this and the complications and challenges that they create. So just to go through some of the recommendations, countries are encouraged to really clearly set out the minimum age of consent to sexual activity, because this is really critical for alignment, so that it's clear in the provision of sexual and reproductive health services, including access to contraceptives, which is where most of the challenges occur among young people. The second recommendation was to consider narrowing the legal defenses available to adults who engage in sexual activities with a child or a minor, which are below the age of consent. And thirdly, claiming that the child appeared to be older, of course, this is a special defense that is regularly and almost always used, should not be considered sufficient grounds to justify this unlawful behavior. So that is not excusable, and it should not be accepted. The fourth recommendation was really to harmonize the age of consent for both adolescent boys and girls, so that both have the same minimum age. And we do understand why this is important as we talk about gender equality and also the empowerment of both girls and boys. The legislation should also include provisions that deal with the legal capacity of mentally disabled adolescents to consent to sex, because we've seen a lot of abuse among our adolescents who are mentally and even physically disabled. So in terms of moving forward, the combination that we alluded to earlier, which then brings about these inconsistencies between the customary and the statutory laws in many of our countries in Eastern and Southern Africa, does complicate this issue. And we do have that in most of our countries in the region. And the challenge with the customary law age of consent, as we all know, is that in most cases, the age is not clear, and in the majority of instances, most of the cases, it's lower than 18 years of age. So these inconsistencies really create a lot of challenges. So moving on now to issues of marriage, we are struggling with issues of child marriage, both in the region and beyond. And the recommendations, once again, to set the minimum age of consent to marriage to 18 years without exception. The inconsistencies between boys and girls do create challenges, and this is not recommended. Hence that removal of the differentiation. And then thirdly, we need to enact a rigorous birth registration system in order to ensure effective compliance with this minimum age, because if we do not have this birth registration system, it then becomes difficult to be able to monitor and set some of these regulatory frameworks, and as well as the legal frameworks. And then the disharmony between the ages of consent to marriage under common or civil law and those provided under customary laws should really be fixed, because this disconnect is creating a lot of challenges and inconsistencies even in the courts of law in dealing with some of these violations. So this is just an example of the countries that are providing for an age of consent, especially looking at access to HIV testing and counseling services. And here it's mainly focusing on policy and not necessarily legislation. And we can see that these countries are Angola, Botswana, Ethiopia, Eswatini, Malawi, Mozambique, Tanzania, Uganda, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. And these ages range from 12 to 18 years. And we can just see that from issues of access to consent to test for HIV and to be provided counseling services, these are some of the countries that have really at least put together the policy to specify very clearly the ages of consent. And this is really helpful in terms of decision making and facilitating access to services for young people. So when we're talking about sexual and reproductive health and rights and the services related to them, these are some of the recommendations. Once again, there's need for that clear setting of the age of consent for HIV testing and pre and post test without counseling, without parental consent. And this is recommended to be set at age 12. And we really commend the countries that have already went a step ahead to either put this in policy or legislation. And that emergency measures should be included if parental consent cannot be contained, because it's not always that parental consent can be obtained. Countries are also urged or encouraged to clearly state in the additional provisions in their legislations that healthcare providers need to respect the views and opinions of the adolescents and young persons accessing services and respect their right to confidentiality. While we appreciate the need for parental consent, the views of young people are really important, and these should be respected. To also again base this age of consent on whether the adolescent is sufficiently mature to understand the risks, benefits, and consequences of the medical treatment that they are being offered. And finally, that the law should be able to guide the healthcare service providers themselves on how they can assess the maturity levels, because they range from psychological, just beyond age. So points of reflection really, as we commemorate Youth Day and as we reflect on the Tshwane Declaration and some of the commitments made by our countries, we need to continue to interrogate and reflect on what does it really mean when we say that the ages of consent to sex, marriage, and services are harmonized. So what does it mean? How do we see that harmonization? And once again, how does that harmonization of ages to consent to sex, service, marriage actually mean in terms of setting the different ages of consent? And we've seen the discrepancies and inconsistencies between these two, between the boys and girls. So the answer is simple: the age of consent to marriage advocated for 18 years without exceptions and without necessarily saying for boys this is the minimum age, or for girls that is the minimum age. And once the second one is that in terms of consenting to sex, the recommendation is to protect adolescents against adults who really prey on them, but also recognize that while the issues around evolving capacities of adolescents, they should be able to consent to sex. And this also impacts on issues around criminalization of adolescents and access to services. And thirdly, when we look at access to services, especially sexual and reproductive health services, we know that this is crucial and even more complicated and made difficult now by the COVID-19 pandemic. It's critical, and therefore the age at which adolescents can access services cannot be unreasonably high, because we know that this would definitely impede access to even preventive services, including HIV testing, the provision of condoms, information, and contraception as and when needed. So moving forward, we need to, as we conclude, that we need to acknowledge that, of course, there has been progress, and it has been steady from 2016, coming now on 2020, and we greatly appreciate the efforts to make young people's well-being a priority through the different laws and policy reforms that have been undertaken by countries in the region. However, there's still a long way to go before the full domestication, which Madam SG talked about, of these regional, continental, and international commitments that our countries have made to address issues of adolescent sexual and reproductive health and rights. So we need to constantly monitor and constantly motivate countries to domesticate these and really implement them. So efforts need to go, just beyond the amendments to the marriage codes, to the penal codes, but we really need to take those brave steps to ensure that the harmonization, the alignment occurs with previously agreed standards, so that adolescent and young people's fundamental human rights to sexual and reproductive health and sexual and reproductive health are maintained, are protected, and are promoted. Thank you. I think this is the end of it. I hope Millicent I have done her a little bit of justice. I didn't mess up the presentation. So thank you very much. Over to you, Chair.
On age of consent, the requirements and implications in relation to adolescents in East Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, we will move to our interactive session where we will have a video, and then we have our interaction after the video.
My name is Tanyarazwa Jamanda from Zimbabwe. As we commemorate International Youth Day 2020, it's very important for us to engage young people from the grassroots level. It's also very important for them to be engaged and involved during the design, implementation, and the evaluation of all programs, particularly those that focus on sexual reproductive health and rights. Hashtag youth engagement for global action. Anything without us is not for us. Youth voices matter. Thank you.
What is accountability? Accountability is when we are held responsible for the actions that we're supposed to take, but we never did as leaders. The young people should be trained to collect and process data, build a picture of the problems they are facing in their communities, and hold account to their leaders to fix them.
I want to talk about right of young people. Really, the young people, they have big role in our country because majority of us, we are graduate different colleagues and we have different ideas and we want to help for different case in order to let our country to be developed by like as a country or like Europe country and something like this.
Okay, hello. My name is Dean Abdul-Jabbar Idris from Sudan, Darfur, Al-Hasahisa IDP camps. I want to talk about the youth activity from this axis, health, education, and employment. The health is very important, 100%, because with the health we can do this others, I mean education and employment. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Barbara from Uganda, and I believe most of the employers of young people in Africa focus on quality work at their places of employment. But my question is how far are they willing to see that the young people bring out the best at their places of employment? Are they protecting them? Is there training? Is there counseling for them?
Provide young people with support they need, including trainings, resources, and aligned platform for them to meaningfully engage and practice the gained knowledge, to become experts and professions and be able to create impact to the community at large for the generations we have and to the generations to come, because education is the most powerful weapon that we can use to change the world.
Thank you very much. Members, just a reminder that those that are not speaking, please mute your mic so that we don't have the nasty feedback from the background. Those that are not speaking, please mute your mic so that we avoid the background noise. So we are going to go through our interactive session from the video from what young people through on our chat. So we shall have probably an interaction on how, on whether you have any difficulties in accessing sexual reproductive health rights services during this COVID-19. So as young people, do we have any difficulties in accessing SRHR services during this COVID-19? Again, members, for those that went offline, please let's mute our mics if we are not speaking. Thank you very much. And another question, thank you. Another question that you may have, young people that you may want to answer or let us know is, as a young person, have you ever articulated a concern or problems to the local government authorities as a young person? Have you ever articulated your concerns or problems to the local government authorities? And probably those two questions, we can then try to have an interaction on our chat group as well. Janice, I could see a question on the chat group. I could see a question on the chat group. There was a question that was asked earlier on, and so this is our poll questions. For those that didn't get them the first time, as a young person, have you ever articulated your concerns or problems to the local government authorities? It's multiple choice. Yes, no, sometimes. So our participants, you can actually select one answer for the question, just one answer from the question. Probably as we continue with that, there was a question that Mrs. Boemo said she would like to answer live. Mrs. Boemo, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, just as we give young people time to go through the poll questions, would you mind answering the question?
Which question is that?
The question was, I would like to find out what has been done so far in the different governments since the adoption of the Tshwane Declaration last year.
Well, thank you very much. We haven't done a survey yet to measure what has been done that can be attributed to the Tshwane Declaration. But as you're well aware, a lot of parliaments have been discussing some of these issues related to consent to sexual activity, consent to access to contraceptives, CSE, among others, teenage pregnancy, among others, and therefore it would be hurried of me to give you what has been done since the Tshwane Declaration, since we need to do at least a small survey and be able to attribute it to this process.
So the responses on the questions are up now. So I would like to read out what our participants all right, so this is our results from the questions. that were asked. So 61.1% of young people said yes, they have articulated their concerns and problems to the local government authorities, and 22% said no, 16.7% said sometimes. The other question that said, do you feel that your input is taken up when you articulate these problems? 16.7% young people said yes, 33.3% said no, 55.6% said sometimes. Our third and last question on the poll was saying, have you had difficulties in accessing SRHR services during the COVID-19 pandemic? 50% of the young people said yes, 27.8% young people said no, and 22.2% said sometimes. Thank you very much, young people, for participating. I think those answers also give us an opportunity to reflect and think on what we can do to improve, especially on the accessing of services during this COVID-19. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to hand over, because of time as well, to Linley, my co-host, to continue with the session. Thank you very much. Over to you, Lily.
Thank you so much, Millicent. Thank you so much, Millicent. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now continue with our third session. This is a session where we'll have a dialogue with our honorable speakers, honorable deputy speakers, representing the Speaker for the National Assembly of South Africa and Botswana. Honorable speakers of most interest to the young people and the rest of the participants today, and as per the program of today, looking at the Tshwane Declaration, is the work that you are doing in your respective countries in response to sexual and reproductive health and rights of young people. Today in this dialogue, I will start with speaking with Honorable Mabuse Mopati Pule. Ladies and gentlemen, Honorable Mabuse Mopati Pule was elected to Parliament in October 2019 for Mochudi East constituency and was appointed the Deputy Speaker of the Parliament of Botswana. Prior to joining politics, he held various senior government portfolios in a career that has spanned 33 years as a public servant. Honorable Mabuse has held different key positions, including Director in the Department of Immigration and Citizenship and Director in the Department of Civil and National Registration. He has also worked for Emang Basadi Association, an NGO that advocates for women's rights. Honorable Pule has in the past, at the government of Botswana, and of children's rights in Botswana. And Honorable Pule has contributed significantly to the domestication of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child by Botswana, which eventually paved way for the development of the current Children's Act. Honorable, firstly, before I come to the question that I have for you today, we would like to acknowledge the progress that has been made by the Republic of Botswana upholding adolescent sexual and reproductive health and rights. For instance, the Parliament of Botswana in 2019, we have learned that passed the Penal Code Amendment Bill, raising the age of consent of sex from 16 years to 18 years. And while this is a great achievement and scales up towards the legislation that is highly protective and less considerate of the evolving capacity of adolescents, it is important to acknowledge that the Parliament was keen in this activity to listen to activists, including young leaders. As a result, the legislature agreed to include the clause in age defense, including the Romeo and Juliet clause. Ladies and gentlemen, the Romeo and Juliet clause states that sex is not illegal if consensual, and if it is between a person who is not more than 2 years older than the other. For example, a 17-year-old and a 19-year-old. However, the age of consent to medical care is not provided for in the legislative provisions under review. And this is an aspect that needs to be given attention for the benefit of adolescents as well as service providers. And all this is despite the fact that the national HIV and AIDS policy sets the age of consent to HIV testing for 16 years. And in this regard, Honorable Deputy Speaker, would you elaborate on the intentions of Parliament to address this loophole at legislation level? Because we believe this will ensure compliance by service providers when delivering services to young people. And this will also establish a steady framework for the young people to demand services. Over to you, Mr. Honorable Mr. Pule.
Thank you very much. Let me start first by recognizing the presence of the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly in South Africa, Honorable Tsenoli Lechesa, and then Honorable Xola Nqola, MP for South Africa, and then also recognize the participation of our honored Secretary General SADC-PF Boemo Sekgoma. Here in our midst, we have representatives from UNFPA, UNAIDS, and then AfriYAN, representatives from SADC-PF, young people amongst us. Ladies and gentlemen, let me greet you this afternoon. It's 2 minutes after 12 now. I am also honored and really, very appreciative of the fact that Botswana has been invited to participate in this very, very important discussion. In Botswana, we have some laws that are related to children. For instance, like in my profile, I've indicated that I was very, very instrumental in the facilitation of the reformation and domestication of the Insurance Act of 1981, which was actually promulgated, which came into effect around 2009. The Children's Act actually made provision for promotion and protection of rights of the child, for the promotion of physical, emotional, intellectual, social development, and general well-being of children, for the protection and care of children, for the establishment of structure to provide for care, support, and protection and rehabilitation of children, and for matters connected therewith. Section 2 defines the child as a person who is below the age of 18 years. Significantly, the Act has also provided in Section 3 as follows: in the event of any conflict or inconsistency between the provisions of this Act and any other legislation, the provisions of this Act shall take precedence, except where the exercise of rights set out in the Act has or would have the effect of harming the child's emotional, physical, psychological, and moral well-being, or of prejudicing the exercise of the rights and freedoms of others, national security, the public interest, public safety, public order, public morality, or public health. And in the same act, Section 5 says a person or a court performing a function or exercising a power under this act shall regard the best interest of the child as the paramount, consideration. And then when you go to Section 15.1 of the same act, it states that every child has a right to the highest attainable standard of health and medical care. And then it says where the parents, other relatives, or guardian of a child are unable due to financial constraints, physical disability, or ill health, or other reasonable cause to ensure the child's enjoyment of the right referred to in this section, the minister shall cause to be taken such steps as are necessary to ensure the child's enjoyment of those rights. And then if you jump to the Public Health Act of 2013, which related, and then you pick the HIV testing. The basic principle laid out by clause 105 is that one shall not conduct a test on another without others' consent. That is captured in 105.1a, or in the case of a child below 16 years, with the consent of their parents. The clause continues to elaborate on the hierarchy of persons to give consent, where a medical practitioner seeks to conduct a test on one with disability, and that is captured in 105.1c. Section 2 of the Interpretations Act, which is which is an act established to reconcile between various acts in the country, defines a child as a person who is under the age of 16 years. And it also defines an adult as a person who is 16 years of age and over. And with the variation in definitions of the ages between this section, the Children's Act in defining a child, and the Children's Act definition takes precedence. So it doesn't matter how, in terms of the Children's Act, other acts, define children, but it takes precedence where there is a confusion. And then we also consider the best interest of the child as a paramount thing when you consider making a decision about whatever should happen to that child. And there is this other long section, which I will not go much into, which talks about, consent under the Public Health Act, consent to medical procedure. Because it also has a reflection on what I said earlier, that in situations where definition of a child is a little bit conflicting, then medical practitioners can also invoke the best interest of the child for the benefit of that child, being, assisted. But when you go to adolescent sexual and reproductive health program, the program aims to provide comprehensive adolescent sexual and reproductive health programs, including HIV prevention. The program also aims to empower adolescents and young people aged between 10 and 24. And this includes, children. The program is guided by the SRHR HIV linkages strategy for Botswana. And this is a blueprint that has been actually, constructed to specifically deal with issues of HIV/AIDS related to young people. Through this program, the government and NGOs provide youth-friendly services to adolescents. And youth-friendly services provide quality, integrated HIV and SRH services and related commodities to adolescents and young people in a friendly, non-judgmental environmental manner. And then you look at the National Health Policy, which now is a little bit silent on provisions of services for children. It is only clear on the ages of HIV testing. In clinical health services provisions, a child needs to be 12 years and over to access services on their own. and do not need parental consent. So you can see how this is so open. Medical practitioners apply the public interest rule of the patient to provide services. Maybe before I conclude, we have talked about, Parliament involvement in trying to, ensure that young people have an influence in decision makings, especially on matters related to them. Most parliaments will have what you call standing orders. If you look at the standing order of the Botswana National Assembly, standing order, I can make a reference to that standing order 101. It actually establishes various, parliament standing committees or select committees. And there is a specific committee under standing order 117D, which establishes what you call a youth, sport, arts and culture committee. Botswana Parliament right now has about 7 young parliamentarians on both sides of the National Assembly. That is on the ruling party side and then the opposition side. All of them together make 7. And all of these young parliamentarians, actually they range between 36 and 38 years. They are all members of this committee. And one of the greatest things that they've been assigned to do is to exercise parliamentary oversight and scrutiny over government ministries, departments, and agencies with portfolio responsibilities in respect of youth, sports, arts, and culture. There are many other activities that they are actually assigned to do, but I just want to pick the one that I've referred to, actually considered to be key. That is to, from time to time, consider and examine government policies and legislation under its portfolio and make such recommendations to government for their review and or amendment. What is also very important is for them, once they've examined all these things, they must come up with a report that they are required to present before the National Assembly for a debate by members of Parliament. So this is one of the roles that young people in this country has been given, and I think as a country we're doing very well. This Parliament, actually the 12th Parliament of the National Assembly, well, as far as I'm concerned, has really scored a lot in terms of involving young persons, in parliamentary decision making. The Minister of Youth is a young person. He's only 38 years old. And you can imagine he debates in Parliament all the time. So when he's in Parliament, he also has a role to criticize or examine any bill that is presented to Parliament. If he finds that probably that bill does not represent the interests of youth, he has that authority to question and seek clarification and make the relevant recommendation to ensure that the interests of children are well represented. In my conclusion, I'm going to say there are still some challenges to harmonizing the definitions and of the child in different laws. Currently, I've just seen a draft bill where the Citizenship Act is being amended to reduce the age of majority from 21 years to 18. The National Children's Council, which has been tasked with working with the Attorney General's chambers to fast-track consequential amendments of the laws, is currently actually working on this area. And I believe, because the council is actually made up of young children as well. So my belief is that if we work very hard as a country, maybe within a time not very far away from us, we should have reconciled, different, definitions of children by various laws in this country. I want to take this opportunity, Madam Moderator, to thank you very much. And if there are questions and maybe clarifications that I have to make, people are free to look for those. Thank you very much and good afternoon.
Thank you, Honorable Pule, for explaining very well and elaborating the work that is being done in Botswana. And it is very interesting to learn. I'm sure the rest of the participants across the region are learning a lot from what Botswana is doing, not just on the policy issue and the legal frameworks, but also in terms of the programs that are happening. And I believe it is very important to not just develop policies and laws, but of great importance is that the country and that countries across Africa are implementing the specific policies that we have in promoting access of adolescents and young people to sexual reproductive health and rights. And to our participants, as we continue this session, I would like to urge you to put your questions in the chat box. Please say your name, organization, and who you're directing the question to. So you can put your questions, comments in the chat box by stating your name, the organization, and the person whom you are directing the questions to. And I can see that comments are coming in through. We have a number of comments from people going through our chat. We'll be able to read through the comments and share also. But in the meantime, we can be checking through the chat and following the conversations that is happening around in consideration to the issues that we're talking about in this session. Moving forward, I would like to speak with our second speaker, who is the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly of South Africa, Honorable Lechesa Tsenoli. Ladies and gentlemen, Honorable Lechesa Tsenoli was re-elected as the Deputy Speaker in July 2019, and his career spans several decades. And before his election, he served in the executive branch of government, first as Deputy Minister of Rural Development and Land Reform, that was from October 2011. And then he also served as Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs from 2013 to 2014. Honorable Lechesa Tsenoli, as a Member of Parliament from 1994 to 1999, has served on the Portfolio Committee on the Reconstruction and Development Program. I would like now to welcome Honorable Lechesa Tsenoli, but before I move on to the question, I would also like to take this opportunity to compliment the Republic of South Africa for putting in place an excellent legislative framework in response to adolescents' access to sexual and reproductive healthcare services. The Republic of South Africa has the most important legislation in respect to consent to medical treatment, access to contraceptives, and consent and treatment for HIV, which is found in the Children's Act 38 of 2005. And in terms of the section 129, a child may consent to his or her own medical treatment, and that the medical treatment of his or her own child, if the child is 12 years or older, and such a child at such an age, it is considerable that the person is mature enough and is at an age where they can understand the risks and consequences of the treatment. However, among the ages of consent that directly affect the SRHR of adolescents, the age of consent to marriage remains a problem. And there are different ages of consent to marriage which are prescribed in the Marriage Act. the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act and the common law. And there's also the overlap between ukuntwala, which is a customary law practice, and the capacity of a parent to consent to the marriage of a child remains problematic. And in this regard, it should be clear in law that no marriage can be concluded or civil or religious or customary without the consent of the child, despite the consent of the parent. Honorable Lechesa, I would like you to kindly elaborate to the participants on the intentions of the Parliament in the area of the ages of consent to marriage. Thank you. Honorable Lechesa Tsenoli. Hello. Do we still have?
Yes.
My apologies. My apologies. Yeah.
Not a problem.
Thank you very much. I wish to associate myself with Boemo Sekgoma and Mabuse Pule with their protocols of acknowledging all leadership of young people present here and the partner organizations that we work with. It is a great opportunity for me, being 65 this year, to be addressing this meeting. You might not believe it, but I feel as young as you are, 20-year-olds and so on. So you mustn't be biased about some of these matters. I thought I should take firstly, let me correct. The people who gave you my name made a mistake. My name is Lechesa Tsenoli, and not vice versa. So please just remember that they made a mistake. I don't know why they did that, yeah. I thought I should say that the things that we would like to see happening on the ground in our families, neighborhoods, and generally communities flow from the constitution that we have adopted, at least in our country, in the constitution, as a result of vigorous struggles in our communities to ensure that some of these issues of concern, such as we are addressing today, are reflected in our constitution. And I think we succeeded in doing that. The second challenge, having a tupatsila, as the constitution is how do we enforce what is in the constitution? So legislation is one of the steps that we take to ensure and provide guidance about implementation of what is in the constitution. The second part, the third part rather, is implementation of the legislation and its enforcement. So any weakness in any of those steps will lead to problems such as we are discussing here. And this is where the courts come in. In our country, one of the arms of the state is the judiciary. So where there's a conflict and/or of interpretation of the legislation, the courts come in and interpret. And some of the changes and amendments to the legislation has come as a result of the court's intervention and decision-making. So some of the legislation that we have had before, for example, about abduction, that the amendments came into play and then led to the subsequent consequential amendment of trafficking of human beings legislation, for example. So that's as an attempt to harmonize laws that speak to the same matter. So this is an area that I think is significant, so that when we pose this question, we must pose them at all levels. Is it provided for in our instances? For example, in the Bill of Rights, in the Constitution, it speaks to issues of the right to dignity, the right to life, as examples. So where people's dignity and or life is threatened by either abduction, by violence, and or any obstructive activities, it is possible to take the route of the courts and have them intervene. Now, Parliament plays a role in overseeing the implementation of the Constitution, and where appropriate, provide for changes to make for appropriate closing of the gap that may exist. So in the instances that we are talking about, for example, that if we found that some of the provisions are not of the legislation are weak, that perhaps we may want to change the Constitution if needs be, that can be done. But where we find that the provisions of the law themselves are weak, then Parliament does not have to go that route. I'm citing these as avenues for oversight from Parliament's point of view. Our role is to oversee implementation first of the Constitution, of the legislation, and the third part that I haven't mentioned is that we have also created Chapter 9 institutions. This Chapter 9 institutions ensures that when things fall between the cracks and there's potential violation of the Constitution, they must step in and close that gap. So this Chapter 9 institution, like the Human Rights Commission, like the Commission for Religious, Linguistic, and so on rights, and the Commission on Gender Equality, for example, and the Auditor General and so on. They are critical role players in contributing towards the resolution of this matter. One of the previous chairpersons of the Commission on Gender Equality attended in India a meeting of men. It was put together by Men Engage, an organization, or a men's forum organization that sought to identify the roles of men and boys for what they call gender justice. So some of the provisions that we are talking about, we have the requirements for doing that work. Parliament collaborates, for example, with the Department of Social Development and the Men's Forum, which is a component of the South African National AIDS Council, to try and deal with questions of what leads to some of the problems that the young people are confronting, for example, in our communities, and what can we do about it? What is happening to women and girls as a result of men, ostensibly and or apparently, and what can be done about those issues? So as we speak, Parliament is engaged in a series of activities, both with the Gender Commission, with the Department of Social Development, to advance the interests of young people in as far as they are impacted upon negatively by current practices that happen as a result, perhaps, of poor legislative support, of poor governmental programs, and of course, the programs that leads to the socioeconomic conditions such as we're confronting in our region, the high levels of poverty, inequality, and unemployment, which renders young people extremely vulnerable, that they cannot achieve whatever their voices are in areas that they seek to do so because of these high levels of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. When conditions are different, then we have a better chance of meeting the needs of young people and so on. There are legislative proposals before the National Assembly and Parliament, broadly speaking. that were introduced in 2020 that has a bearing on this matter. For example, the Disability Rights Bill, the Women Empowerment and Gender Equality Bill, and the National Youth Policy to address the problem the country is facing around those issues. That includes young people expressly, and that's work that is going to be done. I do also wish to state that as a result of huge levels of violence and gender-based violence, there has been an absolutely passionate, militant campaign in the country to address this matter. The president has interacted with organs in civil society that were playing an important role in here. And so Parliament was a platform on which these matters were raised, and therefore subsequently a process is underway to create implementation of the national strategy on gender-based violence. That includes issues that relate to the problems young people raise here, affecting women and girls, but also boys, men and boys. And so in the implementation of the national gender strategy and its emergency response plan as approved by the presidency around April and communicated to all of us, this is going to play an important role in realizing the objectives that young people would like to see, including ensuring that our legislative programs are effectively implemented, enforced, and that the South African Parliament also annually conducts on an ongoing basis what we call sectoral parliamentary work. One of its key components is the Youth Parliament. And the recent one took place in June, and arising out of the June Parliament are a number of things that relates to what young people are saying must be done about youth unemployment, about poverty and inequality, firstly. Secondly, about skills development and of course, education and the quality of education. And fourthly, the question of health and problems of substance abuse as confronts young people. And then, of course, nation building and social cohesion. And that Pule mentioned arts and culture. This is an area in which young people are in big numbers and active in that environment. The creativity of the nations arises from them in that respect, but it is also an area which is also very vulnerable to abuse of all kinds, and therefore interventions there are important. So these 5 areas in which there were recommendations by the Youth Parliament as it occurred in June as part of the sectoral work is an important part of creating conditions for the effective attention to young people's voice and their concerns and the nation's future prospects. And so, in a sense, those provisions are critical. I do wish to point out also that in conditions of inequality and levels of poverty as we have, any of our ambition for the realization of sexual reproductive health rights is a pipe dream. It won't see the light of day. Because often and this is why there is a huge campaign for the how to manage issues that often leads to levels of prostitution by young girls, often young boys, and upwards of age and so on. It is also because of the terrible socioeconomic conditions that people find themselves. And the poorer the community, the more absolutely objectionable young people confront in those conditions. So it is our responsibility, as we see it fit in our country, to follow through some of this implementation of recommendations by young people in our meetings with young people in our country. one of the biggest concerns they have is having attended meetings, contributed ideas, but that they do not get communicated to the response to those recommendations. There is appearance of poor implementation or slow implementation. And so it is correct that we must infuse some agency in the implementation when we have had young people's voices and their contributions so that we accelerate, broadly speaking, our responsiveness to their conditions, just as we have the responsiveness to all peoples that we represent in Parliament. So these are the issues that I thought we should raise. And the specifics of the legislation fall in part of what I referred to, that we may have legislation, but if it's poorly implemented, it's as good as not being present. So my own view is that in the SADC region, we must share ideas about how we can fast track and share amongst each other ways to implement effectively legislation and policies that have been adopted. In the previous term of our parliament, we commissioned as the Speakers Forum, in other words, Parliament itself and the 9 provincial legislatures, a high-level panel to investigate 100 pieces of legislation since 1994, and to assess why does it appear that many of those legislation did not meet the requirements, and what can be done to deal with those issues. So that high-level panel and its investigation of the legislation, as I'm suggesting, is an important function that ordinarily lies with committees, that we can't pass a Children's Act and we do not follow through that its provisions are effectively implemented. And if they are not implemented, how can we quickly provide remedial actions around it? So the provisions in our Children's Act are being amended, and the amendment that has come before were inspired precisely by this concerns, that in the course of implementation, working with NGOs in the sector, loopholes were found and weaknesses were found that needed to close the legislative gap. But the law on its own is not adequate. It is the Parliament and other institutions of government, such as the Chapter 9 institutions and others, and their follow-through, including the courts, being used effectively because they are an arm of state. They must wrap our knuckles as parliaments if we are not doing our work, but so must it do also with men and or women who collaborate to adversely affect children and young people's lives. So the courts, the institutions that support democracy, constitute critical support bases. This is in addition to people's organizations on the ground in our own countries and NGOs that work in this sector, so that we strengthen and broaden the amount of wisdom we are able to impact on young people's life and their concerns. So I hope that my contributions will go some way to answering some of those. Thank you very much, program directors.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Honorable Solomon Lechesa Tsenoli. Very grateful for.
I say it in full, yeah, thank you.
Oh, now I got the name right. All right. Thank you so much. And it was quite insightful that you shared with us the progress that is being done, and hearing from you the number of progress that are being done in terms of looking at the harmonization of the provisions in accordance with age of consent to marriage, and also understanding from you and learning, considering the similarities across Africa in terms of poverty inequalities that we have, which drives us sometimes into child marriage. Thank you so much. It's a great honor once again to hear from the both of you, honorable deputy speakers. And at this point, I will hand over to my co-moderator, Millicent, and also encourage our participants to continue writing their questions and comments in the chat box, stating your name, organization, and whom you are directing the question to. Millicent will take over from here to in the session of the questions and the answers. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Linley, for the moderation. It was quite insightful. So we are quickly going to move to our question and answer section, where our participants have written their questions on the chat box here, and we will read them. And then, yes, I hope they are directed to like this one question. We also have a question from YouTube. I'll also be reading them through. So hopefully the directed honorable will then answer the question. So I'll read my first question is for Honorable Pule. It says there is a very heated discussion on social media about utterances made by Radio Xola last night in Botswana, highlighting the need for age of consent to be reduced and go all the way to 16 because children are already sexually active then, and by 18 they are damaged goods. This is one of the main examples we see on a daily basis. The amendment of the penal code in relation to age of consent to sexual activity was led by young people and supported by an MP, and we are grateful for the collaboration and its end result. But what will it take for the Botswana Parliament to actively prioritize the protection of children against sexual violence and abuse by tightening the justice system? So, Mr. Honorable Pule.
Thank you very much. But first of all, I want to thank my fellow Deputy Speaker of South Africa for such a very brilliant contribution. I can see that you are doing a lot in your area to promote, rights of children. And well, I've heard the question, though it's a little bit controversial. And I'm also worried that in the question, there is somewhere where there is reference to children as damaged goods. And I don't know whether that is really the right way to label our children as damaged goods. But basically, when the Children's Act was reviewed in 2009 to domesticate a UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, the basic principle was to comply with the requirements of the United Nations, because there is a internationally recognized definition of a child. That is, a child should be somebody in the ages below 18 years. So we basically are, complying with the requirements. And I'm not very sure. I think Honorable Tsenoli will actually guide me in this one, because I know he has more experience than me. Whether when UN has actually set up a principle, can we really fall below it? Maybe we could fall above, but maybe not below it. I don't know. This is a subject for another day. But basically, I just want to respond to that one by saying the government of Botswana was trying to respond to the call from the United Nations, which defines a child as somebody, below the age of 18. We are also in Botswana in the process of looking at the sex offenders bill. And when you look at it, actually it's currently at draft stage. It's with the Attorney General's chambers for consideration. And then the other thing that we are currently doing is to capacitate members of parliament on issues of sexual and reproductive health, so that maybe once they are done, it will be very easy for members of parliament like Honorable Tsenoli has said, that I really loved the way he put it, because he said the overall role of parliament is to ensure that the constitution is executed, and that's exactly what we are doing, ensuring that the constitution is actually respected. And then if there are some doubts about the execution of the constitution, which is a supreme law in the country, then we can go into examination of organizations which are responsible for that. And then if there are issues that we pick, then we can go and discuss them in parliament and come up with a set of recommendations for betterment. So basically that's the role. So we want to believe that if members of parliament are properly capacitated, then they should be able to provide, proper oversight. And basically that's what Governor Botswana is trying to do right now. I know, I must be honest, we have not been doing very well in the previous. We have just realized that the select committees that are established under the National Assembly have not done a very good job in the previous years. But we are now very steadfast about it. We are very rigorous. We want to ensure that all the sitting committees really do what they are supposed to do. That is oversight, promote oversight, and ensure that laws are implemented properly. Like the Children's Act, I want to believe that is one of the acts which we are looking at very, very well, very closely, because the act, really has fully domesticated UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And there was a little bit of reference to African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of Children. We thought when we embraced the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, we have actually taken a step above the African Charter. So I want to believe that most of the provisions in the Charter are also, included in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. So to that question, I'll just basically say that. I don't know whether I've answered, given enough response, but if there are still some doubts, I'm here to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Pule. So Mr. Honorable Xola, please just be ready. There is a question for you. And also to our speakers, please keep the answers very brief so that young people are able to ask as many questions as they can. And then we also have young people who are also on the panelists as well, who have questions. So the young people on the panelists that have questions, please ask the questions before I ask the Honorable to answer his.
Okay.
Young people on the panelists, do you have any questions for our speakers before I hand over?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, moderator. One, I think there was a question here that was put on the poll of the experience of young people when engaging with their government regarding issues facing young people, which I think the poll was giving us, moderator, the reflection of how we have relations with our governments in the SADC region. But I think more of what we must take from the question is, how do we then best ensure that we infuse young people in the authority of all these entities, so as to ensure that young people across the member states of SADC do get access to those institutions of government, so that we don't only be part of the begging and the begging and the engaging part of governance across our own states. So I think it poses a challenge to ourselves on why do we then have to always be the one who goes seek for help? Why are we not at the forefront of providing help to young people? What we have, Honorable Tsenoli can attest to that here in South Africa, we have what we call 40% representation. And that in each and every strategic entity in the country, we must actually ensure that there is a complement of 40% of young people within that. If you speak of a board, if you speak of members of parliament, if you speak of any strategic sector of society in our own member states, so that we are able to ensure that we are active agents of change towards ensuring that we advance youth development. The last with regard to the Deputy Speaker of Botswana, he spoke of the Minister of Youth. I would like to check how is it structured in Botswana, because here in the country we have combined youth, women, and persons with disabilities. So how in Botswana is it structured? Because in both the legislature and the executive, we have got the portfolio committee on youth, women, and people with disabilities. We equally have a minister with regard to the same portfolio, which I think at some point it gives too much burden, because these are vulnerable groups of society, and giving them attention requires ample time. So I wanted to check with that with regard to Botswana. Lastly, with regard to South Africa, Honorable Litsodi, there's been views amongst young people across SADC in our interactive sessions, part of which is having youth, women, persons living with disabilities, and children as vulnerable groups of society. Don't we see it fit that we must therefore separate that young people must have their own ministry and their own portfolio committee of parliament that focuses on youth development in the country and doing oversight on youth development and making the executive accountable? Don't you think that it's befitting now that we should have a single ministry that deals with young people and children alone, and a single ministry that deals with women and persons with disabilities? Thank you very much, Millicent.
Thank you, Honorable Xola, for the questions. They were quite insightful, and probably to the speakers, we can answer those questions very briefly so that we have 2 more minutes to go through another set of questions. So very briefly, can we answer the directed question from Honorable Xola?
I think the first question is coming to Botswana. In Botswana, we do not have a quota for young people, to be honest. I haven't seen, maybe I have to inform myself more with the youth policy, national youth policy. But for women, I know the representation, the quota is around 30%, though we're doing very poorly, because there are only, 6 women in parliament right now. And out of those 6, only 1 has been elected. The other 1 has been the specially elected MPs. So you can see that the country, we have dropped actually. In the previous parliament, I think it was better, but we've gone down. But what we have actually done as parliament in Botswana is to ensure that the youth committee, the select committees, is manned by young people only, young parliamentarians. Like I said earlier, there are 7 of them. And there are only 2, I would say, somewhat adult members of parliament who are above 45 years. Because for parliament, the youth is actually goes up to the age of 45. But there are only 2 members of parliament in that committee who are above 45. So all of them really are young persons. And of course, the president has actually deliberately appointed a young cabinet minister so that he can actually oversee the activities of the ministry from a young perspective, so to speak. So basically, that's what we are doing, and we are trying to ensure that, you know, that's why we have established the Ministry of Youth, so that youth can run their affairs. And we also have established a few funding under the youth ministry, like the Youth Development Fund, which specifically has been constructed to fund youth entrepreneurs. So that's what we are trying to do right now. But like I said, I cannot really raise a flag and say we are doing well. We're also struggling, but we are hopeful that in not too far away future, I think we'll make an achievement. As you know, that really there is need for high regard for youth development and empowerment in any member state. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Pule, for answering the question from Honorable Xola. As we go through our chat box, young people on the panelist that are supposed to ask our speakers questions, are you here? Please ask the speakers the questions. Whilst we're on that, Honorable Deputy Speaker of South Africa, there is a question for you as well. It says, child marriage is still legal in South Africa with consent from the Minister of Home Affairs. This contracts with the Maputo Protocol ratified by South Africa. How do we end child marriages completely? So this is a question to the Honorable Deputy Speaker of South Africa. And then Robert Chifundo, do you have a question for our speakers? Robert Chifundo, a question to our speakers? David, do you have any questions to our speakers? David Samikwa.
Thank you. It may be helpful for you to just reiterate the questions briefly so that the honorable speakers may respond at once if those who have posted are not available to take on the calls, fill the questions.
All right. So I will just repeat the question for the Honorable Deputy Speaker of South Africa. It said child marriage is still legal in South Africa with consent from the Minister of Home Affairs. This contracts with the Maputo Protocol ratified by South Africa. How do we end child marriages completely?
The age of majority was reduced from 21 to 18. So a child, according to the Child Act, is 18 years old. If the child is below 18, then they can only marry with the consent of the parents. In the absence of parents, by a magistrate and or the Department of Home Affairs. The Marriage Act is under revision, especially because of the problems across a variety, including of religions, Muslim marriages and so on and so on, Christian marriages and traditional marriages and so on. So the revision that is planned is going to impact on the question you are raising. So once finalized, because that's a process underway, we will know what the final agreement is with the new Marriage Act. And it follows a court case as well, in addition to other concerns that have been expressed. This is why that process is underway for the amendment of the Marriages Act in South Africa. I hope I answered that question, yeah.
Thank you, Honorable, for answering the question. But looking at our time, we are supposed to be wrapping up and closing the session. So young people, if you still have more questions, I'm sure we can put them on the chat box. There were also questions from the YouTube, young people that were watching from YouTube. But I think we have to wrap up now, and we will have, please, we will have our closing remarks with Hussein. Hussein, please give us the closing remarks for the session.
Thank you very much. Please allow me to start acknowledge the presence of high-level speakers, His Royal Highness Prince from Lesotho, champion from AIDS Free Generation, Honorable Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly of South Africa, Honorable Deputy Speaker representing the Speaker of National Assembly of Botswana, Ms. Boemo Sekgoma, Secretary General of the SADC Parliamentary Forum, and my fellow young leaders across the region. Good afternoon to you all. International Youth Day each year came as a reflection or reminder on the progress that have been made so far on our initiatives, programs, seeing on how best we have learned, seeing how best we can share best practices from all aspects of our lives in the region. International Youth Day, it's set as a benchmark on how best we can learn from our initiative and programs from the local, from the national, from the regional, and even on the global platforms, on seeing on how best we can leverage the settings as to inform political settings on how better they can engage with the young people toward improving the standard of living of our fellow young people. We do often say nothing about us without us. So for me as a young leader, this carries as a statement of our accountability to seek spaces in political participations, but also to seek those spaces on how best we can raise up our voices, not just to raise based on issues of our concern, but also using those spaces, political spaces, as how best we can influence on how best we can suggest various innovative solutions based on the challenge that we've been facing as young people across the regions. The Tshwane Declaration is a unique platform which not just set as to champion sexual development and rights of young people across the region, but also it's set to have meaningful discussions on how best we can take these challenges or agendas into success or into implementations mode. And even this, the setting as session is part of the proof that that Tshwane Declaration has set that opportunity that young leaders, they can have active and meaningful interaction with the members of parliament. Now we have 10 years remaining to mark or to reach the 2030 agenda for all of us. And this also reminds us as young people that some of us won't be young again. So this also set as a call to my fellow young leaders, and that we have to use this time that we have as young advocates, as young leaders, to use this time effectively to influence the agenda of young people, to carry the weight of issues of young people in our shoulders on making sure we voice up the voice of the voiceless. And whenever we have such platforms of political representation, that we use them accordingly on how best we can serve our fellow young people. I would like to take a deep chance to appreciate our partners who have been keen from the beginning, like organizing these platforms, who have been more front on making sure Tshwane Declaration has put into practice. I would like to appreciate the SADC Parliamentary Forums, UNAIDS, UNFPA, UNESCO, AfriYAN ESA, APHRC, for making sure we are not just discussing, but rather we are making impact, carrying out the agendas of young people on improving sexual reproductive health and right. And also our special appreciation goes to all my fellow young leaders who has been part and parcel on having this kind of platform since way back. And we keep momentum into space on making sure we not just discuss these issues, but rather we try our level best creating spaces that we can influence various solutions on these kind of issues. I know time is tough based on issues of pandemic COVID-19, but we have to keep going. We have making sure the agendas of young people are put in place as we reach on 2030 that we have the world is a better place for all of us, or for us, for all. So in our AfriYAN, we have a say which says Viva AfriYAN. So I can say Viva Africa. So thank you all. I wish you all the best on your endeavor, and please stay safe where you are, and let's carry the agendas of African young people toward its potential, toward its implementation. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Hussein Melele, our Vice President of AfriYAN. We have come to the end of today's session. We would like to thank our honorable members and our young people for participating, and our partners that made this section and today's International Youth Day possible. Thank you very much. This is the end of our section. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you very much. We regret we can't offer Honorable Hussein Melele another youth 20 years. He has to join our ranks.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the week. Enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Boemo. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We really appreciate. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lindley and Millicent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Lindiwe, thank you.
Thank you. I was saying Lindiwe, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope YouTube is off now.
It's still live. Okay, let me stop it.